Student still shows up. Security systems closed meeting. Anything I need to know about? I don't know. We'll put it on there.
I did hear that one time, he says, let's talk about the security items from that CIA guy.
Oh, all I need to do is walk in the city office and you can see it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's back on.
Does that need to be a closed meeting? Yes, it does.
Probably. Oh.
What's your recording on?
Yeah, I got less than a minute. So. Hey, you ready? Recording now?
Let's do it. 6 o'clock.
Okay, it is recording.
So
Will
everybody-
you let Sarah in?
Okay, it's 6 o'clock. We'll call to order the August 25th, 2020 regular meeting of the Pleasant View City Council. Welcome, everyone. We'll start off with a pledge of allegiance, opening prayer reading or expression of thought by Dave Mary. Dave.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful this evening to be able to join together as city council and city staff, and we're grateful for the blessings we have of living in this community and Pleasant View, and for the freedoms that we enjoy. We pray tonight that that would help us to discuss the things that are necessary for us to discuss and resolve, and we pray that we'll be guided, and we pray that thy blessings will be upon this community and the people here and wonderful people that live in Pleasant View. We're grateful for all we've been given, and we ask for thy blessing this evening in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
All righty. We have the reading of the electronic meeting determination for conducting a meeting without an anchor location, even though I feel like we have an anchor location, but we'll read this because we don't know exactly what the heck's going on. Nor do they. In accordance with the Utah State Code, section 52-4-2074A, I, Leonard Coughlin, the city mayor, hereby make the following declaration: that a state of national and state emergency has been declared in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that Governor Herbert has extended the emergency declaration for the state of Utah and Weaver County, and that state code has been amended to allow for the conduct of electronic meetings in an emergency without an anchor location, and that the mayor shall read or cause to be read at each electronic meeting the reasons and facts behind the declaration, and therefore Pleasant View City Council shall hold electronic meetings as provided for in state code. There you go. All right, moving on. Yes, sir.
Mayor,
Yes.
Mayor, would you move the microphone just a little bit closer to you, possibly? You're very, you've been better in meetings gone by.
Is there a volume or a kind of
That's a little better just with you moving your head that far a little bit.
All right. Declaration of conflicts of interest. Does everybody have the agenda, and is there any conflicts that need to be, actually it doesn't point, it goes in a circle. But can you still hear me okay?
You're,
Yeah,
you're
it
better.
sounds-
You're better there now.
Okay. Any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? Seeing none, we'll move on to comments or questions for the mayor and council from the public. Any members of the public? Bill, anything on YouTube? Give Bill.
No comments yet.
He's getting back to his office.
No comments yet.
All righty. We'll move on to consent items. Minutes of August 11th, 2020, and the bills of Pleasant City. Any questions, concerns, comments? If not, I'd entertain a motion for the consent items.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion by Bailey, second by Marriott. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. First item of business, discussion and possible action to approve the escrow agreement for Serenity subdivision located at approximately 650 West and Pleasant Drive. Applicant Mark Green, presenter Jill.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So Mark Green has had his final last year, 2019, and he is ready to record, which requires the escrow for any of the improvements that is not done yet. So Mark Green has been awesome in getting this escrow agreement to us, and I have verified everything's good, as well as Ben has given his amount for approval, which I did send those out to you yesterday. I don't know if you saw those in your emails. So we are requesting and staff is recommending approval of the agreement.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Jill?
Yes, just so I understand, then he has to post the 220 remaining. Is that
Yes,
okay?
correct. So developers can opt to put improvements in the subdivision before recording. So Mark Green wanted to try and get as much as he could done before he recorded, which he's just requesting now. So whatever's not done, along with the 10% guarantee, is required for the escrow, which Mark has done that for us.
Cool. And the 5% contingency, will you just explain that to me just a little bit too?
It's 10%. So the guarantee amount,
Contingency.
the guarantee amount, what that is for is to make sure anything that breaks or has an issue, that it can be fixed. So when it goes into conditional, which means the 1 year period to make sure everything's done, usually everything's released except for that amount of the warranty period. So that way, if anything happens, that escrow can be requested.
Okay.
But
So
once it's final, then it will be released.
okay, and then the 5% contingency above that, the line above that.
Sorry, I'm
That's-
pulling
that-
everything up.
The
Contingency.
contingency is just for fluctuations in price.
There
Okay.
you go.
Okay.
Thanks, Dana.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
So all of the improvements that the developer has done on their own, that's inspected prior to the posting the bond for the escrow agreement.
Yes, so Ben goes and inspects everything and makes sure the amount of what we are needing for whatever improvements are left or remaining. So he goes and he makes sure everything's up to city code throughout the whole process anyway. So when they say, yes, we're ready, then he makes sure what's not done is accounted for and posted.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are you ready for a motion?
Yes.
All right, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the escrow agreement for Serenity subdivision applicant Mark Green.
I'll second that motion.
Motion by Arrington, second by Uri. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Presentation. Thanks, Mark. I see you're down there in the corner listening in. Presentation on the subdivision process. Bill.
I'm going to share my screen here. Go through a little bit of a PowerPoint with you guys. So, and I've asked Dana to be a part of this conversation as well, and Tyson and Jill, because this is a collaborative effort between all of staff. And I felt like if you guys had questions about any of these processes or requirements, that this would be a good time to talk about those things with all of the staff listening to any questions or concerns that you guys might have. So this is meant to be interactive. If you have questions or concerns, please do pause and jump in as necessary. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Just so that just as a basic background, our processes and our ordinances are based on requirements that we have both in our code as well as things stemming from state code. And a lot of these requirements that are in place, or the procedures that are in place, there's not a whole lot of flexibility that's put into them. Things with the zoning ordinance and what we allow or don't allow, and things that we want to see in a neighborhood, like make every house have a 2-car garage, for example. Those are things that we can decide kind of independently, and we can have a little more flexibility in what we want versus what happens in other communities. With the subdivision process, it's not as flexible. It's pretty strict as far as what's required and where and by whom and how the timing and everything goes. And this is both to protect the city's interests as well as to protect the investments of developers and make sure that their developments are being processed in a timely manner that is as efficient as possible, but also to make sure, like I say, that the city's interests in the subdivision process are protected. So in preparing this presentation, I really wanted to kind of make it more of a real thing for you guys. And so I actually pulled a couple of developments that have recently gone through to kind of guide through what happened and what is supposed to happen and how things look on the ground, and make it a real world kind of a presentation. So the first step in the subdivision process is we are approached by a landowner, and they do what's called a concept plan. A concept plan is a very simple, straightforward thing. It's a very broad strokes kind of look at what the developer wants to do with the property. In this case, this property is owned by the Hadleys, and they own just over an acre, or roughly an acre, right there where you see that is along, I think that's 3100 North. Jill, is that right? 3100?
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes, it is.
thanks, Jill. And their desire was pretty simple. They have a house on the westerly portion of the property. They want to split off the easterly portion and make 2 lots where they currently had 1. This is a very simple process. It's pretty straightforward. But the purpose of the concept plan is to get a look at the property and see if what they want to do with their property is even possible at all. Staff will generate, based on what's given to us on the concept plan, an idea of what will be required going forward, and really a very broad strokes idea of what could be a problem going forward, and potential resolutions or thoughts. Just again, very broad strokes ideas about what to go forward with that. Jill or Dana, Tyson, any other thoughts on a concept plan?
A concept plan is also the opportunity to ask questions when we have our meeting with them. So they meet with our development review committee, which is our DRC, which consists of Tyson, Dana, Ben, Ryan, Bill, and I. So, I mean, that's...
And the mayor. Don't forget the mayor.
Yeah, and the mayor. Well, the mayor is everywhere. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a good opportunity for them to ask good questions and for us to make sure that they look at certain things when they move forward, like the new state LID process. But that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Tyson, Dana, anything to add to that?
Just what would constitute a complete plan for concept?
There are some specific requirements for the concept plan that are required. Again, it's pretty broad strokes at this point of the game. Before a developer puts a whole lot of money into other requirements that we'll go over in just a minute, we want to get an idea of if the project is even feasible. So we try to come up with ideas and concerns at this stage that are like project killers, right? So if the project was going to require, I don't know, say a brand new water system to be put in, that may make, in the case of this 2-lot subdivision, that may make it so that this guy wants to either hold off until someone else can help him with that, or the city puts the thing in, or, you know, this project isn't feasible at that level.
Bill, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it at this time that you would also decide whether or not this is a minor subdivision or a regular, and then the next move, what that would require?
That's right. So I'll go over that in just a second. That's a great question. So thank you for that. Dana, did you have anything? I saw you unmute.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is like 30,000 foot kind of thing. We're looking for the major items, you know, make sure the infrastructure's in the area, checking for that, checking for drainage patterns, accesses like onto highways, restricted accesses and things like that.
Okay, let me address or maybe go back to Tyson's comment, and that was, well, what exactly is required here? If I come in with a drawing on the back of a napkin that I did at the restaurant, is that going to be accepted, or is there specific guidelines that those people that are coming in for a concept plan know what they need to bring in? Is that outlined?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
That's a great question, and the answer is that the requirements are spelled out specifically and explicitly in the code as to what's required at each level of approval. So if they don't have everything they need to at this stage, we can ask for more information. Concept plan, like we've said, is pretty broad strokes, and so you know, we need enough information to help inform the conversation, but we're not asking for the whole chapter and verse of every little detail of what's going to be required going forward. So concept plan, we require enough information, and it's per the code, to help inform the process going forward. But at this stage, again, we're not looking for all of the little details that will come later.
Okay, is there a checklist or something outside the code for the layperson to be able to come and say, what do I need for a concept plan that you can hand? Here's the checklist. This is what it needs to include. And then we'll.
Yeah, there certainly is. And Jill has attached that to every application that comes in, and the developers sign it and presumably know what that checklist is when they bring stuff in. That's attached into the concept plan, to the preliminary plat, and to the final plat, which we'll go over here in a second.
Bill? Oh, sorry.
Good.
Are you going to go, Steve, or I just had a quick question?
Go ahead.
Sarah?
So,
Steve.
okay. So with our requirement, a lot of those are set by state code first, and then any additional things that we might need, including, you know, our unique situation here. But a lot of what dictates is what is required at concept is already required by state law. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, the idea behind that is, and it's through the whole process, but the idea is that this protects the city's interest in the development as well as the developer's pocketbook and time frame going forward.
Sure. Steve.
You're probably going to get to this, so if I'm cutting ahead, then let me know. But I would really like to know, and hopefully you'll cover this, as to when these different steps are brought to the city council. Is that going to be part of your presentation?
Yes, it is. I'll explain all of that in great detail.
Because I think, you know, we as a council, and I'm speaking to the council now, need to kind of think about this, because this goes back to a week or a meeting or two ago, when we had a discussion as to whether we let staff take care of it, or whether this is something that's brought to the city council. And I think this is a very important discussion. And thanks, Bill, for bringing this up, because, you know, for example, a concept is something that's going to change the whole city look, whether it's a whole subdivision, or, you know, whether it fits into some zoning ordinance or code, or those types of things. You know, that's a very important part of what the city council is, and their look and their decision for the city. You know, and I think, again, those are important things. I'd hate for staff to just make that unilateral decision. Well, we're going to put a subdivision here, we're going to put a road in there, or wherever it goes, whether it's state statute or not. But again, I don't think we're going to discuss or decide these things now, but I think we need to get that. And hopefully, Bill, that's something that you're looking at doing, is maybe revamping that, so that, you know, do we really need to know about the escrow amount? I don't know if that's written in our code. You know, do we need to actually bring that to city council? Because I think going forward, we need to make it as smooth as possible for these developers, or the property owners, or our customers, whoever we're looking at. And I think that's something that we really need to look at. And if we do decide that it is not, you know, not necessarily come, then we need to make those adjustments to the code, so that the city's not put in a bad situation either. Because I don't want to put Jill or any of the staff or Bill in any situation where they have to make these, you know, life-threatening decisions. So anyway, go ahead, Bill. Sorry about that.
No, you bring up a good point though, Steve, and I appreciate that. One of the things that the staff is looking for in the concept plan is adherence with the general plan and the compliance with the underlying zoning ordinance. And if the proposed subdivision came in, for example, if this were in an A2 zoning district, this current thing that we're looking at, then obviously this wouldn't, what their desire to subdivide this property wouldn't go. And so the staff could just instantly say, don't waste your time, it's not going to go.
Well, but if, for example, you know, 2700, there's a lot of different places down there, and things that have been brought forth that the particular customer or citizen or contractor wants a certain look. And if it's A2 and they want to change it to something else, that's where the concept could be brought before the city council. I see a, you know, great need for that. If we're going, before they spend the money, we need to, you know, see if we're even up to it. And, you know, that's something that staff should, or I don't think should ever decide, but that should be brought forward to the city council. So
you're
you know,
right.
Stuff like that. Anyway, sorry.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And in that case, it's a zone change. It's a legislative decision. Staff passes those on to the city council almost immediately, just because we don't want to waste a lot of the developer's time dithering about whether we think it's right or not. If they have a concept plan, and that would be similar to the zone change that Brent Bailey just recently did along 2700 North, where he came in and said, you know, we really want this to be CP2. He talked with staff just a little bit about what his desires were with the property. We suggested a particular zone. He agreed. It went to the council, or the planning commission, then to the council, and everything was fine. So that does not involve a subdivision. So we're not quite on that particular item tonight, but that's a good review. At concept level, we do check against the existing zoning. So if this were to come in and it wasn't an A2 and they wanted to split it up into half-acre lots, we would say, that's great, your plan looks awesome, but first we need to step back and do a zone change. That gets to the council as soon as possible. We do public hearings and all of that.
The last thing that I'm going to say is I think we just need to streamline where we can, and not make government so involved in every aspect that we muddy it down to where it becomes this molasses process. You know, we don't need to have it be so fast paced that stuff gets away from us that we regret in 20 years. I'm not saying that at all either, but there has to be a fine line.
There's a balance there.
A balance, and I don't know if we're there in Pleasant View. Anyway, all right.
I ask a question too? Sorry.
Sure, go ahead, Ann.
When they request for that zone change at that point, then they have to go before planning commission and they need like what, a 10-day notice to be on the planning commission?
Correct.
And then after that, they go to city council and they need another, what, 10 days? Or can they be seen the very next week in city council?
No,
No,
by
there's
law, we have to have at least a noticing period of at least 10 days.
Okay, so they have to almost skip one city council meeting before they can be seen by the next.
That's state law, yes.
Okay.
Okay,
And-
any other questions on that? I
Correct
wanted
me
to
if
show.
I'm wrong,
Oh, go ahead, Tyson.
but correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the point back to what Steve was saying. We might say something along the lines of, we wouldn't recommend it as staff. So when we come in and staff recommends this whatever their concept is, we might not do that because of zoning or other reasons, public works, water, we've done that before, just back to what Steve was saying.
Yeah.
We don't decide, but we tell them we wouldn't recommend it based off of something.
And then the planning commission get that recommendation if they decide to come anyway? Is that included in the staff report?
Yes.
Okay.
That hardly ever happens.
Well, it hardly ever happens
Only because the developer, whoever, knows that if you're going to send a negative report to the planning commission, they might as well not even do it. So they might as well sit down and listen to staff and say, what do you think will fly with the planning commission? And what, I think this next one's going to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, so this is the next one. And as you can see from this one, this is obviously quite a bit more complicated. As you're looking at this, there are some definite red flags. And this was the first concept plan that these guys submitted to the city for this acreage here. It sits in between Jacobs Mill and Pleasant Fields. If you guys are familiar with the area, I think you've seen it. This was called originally Maycock Moore. It's now called Rocky Meadows subdivision. And phase 1 is currently under construction down there off of Highway 89, and you've seen that. But the first thing that we noticed about this one is that you have 6 different cul-de-sacs in this subdivision. I don't know if it's very clear on your screen. It's a little bit small on mine. I apologize. It's bigger on my bigger screen. So hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. Our code does not allow for having consecutive cul-de-sacs like this. So instantly the staff was able to say, you know what, you guys are going to need to rethink the layout of this subdivision, which they did. And I'll get to how that looks here and when we get to the preliminary plat. But the other one was a minor subdivision. It was just 2 lots, not a big deal. But in this case, it's obviously much more complicated. They've got 100 lots in there, lots of roads to be dedicated, infrastructure to put in. This was it involves a lot of topography and all kinds of things like that. So this was obviously much more complicated. But as a concept plan, our responses to these things are still pretty simple and straightforward. We say, hey, we're looking at this against the code, and these are the 5 or 6 things we've noticed. Very broad strokes, very open, and the concept plan is just a staff level approval. The city council and the planning commission never see a concept plan. It's handled at a staff level. We get concepts and responses back to the applicants within a couple of weeks, and then they move on to the preliminary plat phase of the development. Any thoughts or comments on this, Dana, Tyson, Jill, anything?
I thought that was good, Bill.
Thank you. The reason for this is to highlight the different processes and how some things are relatively simple and some things are straightforward. Once they get through this concept plan stage, then they go on to what's a couple of different tracks here. The first track is the simplest and easiest way, and it's called the minor plat. In order to qualify for a minor plat, it has to be 4 lots or fewer. It has to involve no additional infrastructure to the city, and by infrastructure it means street improvements. It means curb, gutter, and sidewalk. It means no expansion of existing roadways, no additional water lines, no utility work. Just these guys, and this one is so simple. It's easy. It's on an existing road. The sidewalk, curb, and gutter is already in. They just have too much property, I guess, and they want to split half of it off. And so there you go. They've got the one lot over to the west and one lot to the east, and this is a pretty straightforward process. Because it's so simple and because there's no additional infrastructure required for what they're proposing to do, these things, they're much more streamlined process. They don't have to go to the city council at all, and the preliminary and final plats go together. There's no review of any construction documents because there is no construction. There's no bonding because, again, there's no additional infrastructure to be given to the city. These are very straightforward, very vanilla kinds of things. The Planning Commission votes on them and approves them, and they're on their way. These things typically take anywhere from a couple of months to maybe 3 months to get through. And a minor plat is the absolute most simple, straightforward thing that we do as far as subdivision is concerned.
And that's standard all over the state. That's not unique to our city at all. So.
Yeah, Sarah, I know you've done a lot of research on this, so I'm grateful for your help on this. Tyson, Jill, Dana, any other thoughts on minor plats?
No, I think you hit it.
I got a question about utilities. Is there a discussion about utilities in these? Because
so if there is sufficient utilities in the road, then that's all that we need to determine. So there is a discussion basically at a staff level about the availability of sufficient utilities. If, for example, this 2-lot went in and it was already a maxed out system, then it would kick it up to the next level and they would have to do some improvements in order to subdivide the way they want to. But in this case, and in most cases when it's a minor plat situation, everything that they need is already in the road and they just have to put in a lateral and they're good to go.
If you already had issues, you might bring those up. Like if you were already having water shortage calls, which hasn't been a thing, like, yes, they're looked at, but for us, they normally don't equate to a problem.
It would be very rare. And yeah.
I just wonder if those are things that are on a checklist somewhere that it's a minor plat. It's not really a big deal because it doesn't affect the roads and sidewalk and gutter, but are there other things that are on a checklist? Just a thought.
Yeah. So they do have to meet all of the requirements of the preliminary and final plats, just like regular preliminary and final plats do. They're just the things that we're looking at, the checklist of things. 9 out of 10 are not going to apply to this kind of subdivision. So the one that does apply, we check it, but the 9 out of 10, we just, okay, we don't need to worry about that with this kind of thing.
Okay.
Dana, Jill, I saw you guys unmute. Are you guys good?
I was just going to say that we check the utilities on all subdivisions, all lot splits, anything like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to get back to this bigger guy, and because of the conversation that we had at the staff level with the concept plan, you can see that they have rearranged their subdivision lot layout and street layout significantly. Instead of having all of those cul-de-sacs that terminated off to the north, they've rearranged things and made it so that there's more interconnecting streets. They cut the number of cul-de-sacs from 6 to 4, which is a reduction of 1/3. And that's great for a number of reasons, not least of which is that Tyson just doesn't like to snowplow in cul-de-sacs. Everyone wants to live on a cul-de-sac, but no one wants to snowplow in a cul-de-sac. One other thing that came out in the concept plan was this interconnection right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving around on this street out here to the, what I will call the south. Is that south, Mayor?
Yeah.
South and east.
Southeast.
Yeah, that was actually a part of the adjacent subdivision, but it was a lot that had not been developed. The property owner decided and developer decided to buy that property in order to make a road that would cut out through here. Part of the reason for that is because we have a maximum cul-de-sac length of 500 feet. And there was no way for the property owner or the developer to punch through onto Pleasant View Drive up here to the north. And so they decided to buy this lot and put the road through here and out onto 1100 West that way. So
Can I ask
again,
a question?
Yeah.
Why, and I know there's a reason, I just can't remember, but why is the maximum cul-de-sac length 500 feet?
Well, that's what it's in our standards. There are lots of good reasons for that. It has to do with fire code. It has to do with utility looping. It has to do with water connections and all kinds of important things like that. So that's just our standard that we've adopted. Other places it's different. Obviously, some places there are out in the county and rural areas where you have miles and miles of dead end street. But in our situation where we've got a much higher density than a very rural area, we want to make sure that our fire code is adhered to and we get people in and out as quickly and safely as possible. Also, and this is just more of an aesthetics and maybe a touchy-feely kind of thing, but it makes for better circulation around and through a subdivision, not having all of those cul-de-sacs. Interconnectedness of streets also creates an interconnectedness of neighborhood. And so instead of having to get from A to B and you have to go all the way around, you can just get over. So.
And just to fill in with what Bill's saying as well, the cul-de-sacs increase your maintenance overall. Yes, plowing, they probably add, you probably put 15 to 20 minutes to clean up a cul-de-sac, and it's a safety concern as well. So part of it is a time management, where a street, you do that much area in a matter of a second driving through, but a cul-de-sac, those are probably 10 to 15 time back up, repeat, and you probably put about 15 minutes per cul-de-sac. And then the dangers of backing up that many times in a large piece of equipment is always more dangerous every time you back up because you don't have a clear view. But maintenance for the road, you're doing a bigger area that serves a smaller amount of people. When that money, if you stretched it out into the length of a road, you're going to get more bang for your dollar. They're difficult to maintain that way. And then water quality. So all the dirty water we've been doing are on long, old dead end lines. And your chlorination goes out, I believe it's roughly 3 days, depending on usage. And then obviously in older areas, you start to get your red water calls there. So they're a nuisance for maintenance, safety, and health reasons all across the board, really.
So if Tyson had his way, no one would ever put a cul-de-sac in anywhere.
They have their place, but
they do have their place, but
they shouldn't be the main feature anywhere, but they definitely, you have a place, that is the only option. And I definitely understand that. They just shouldn't be the design feature.
Thank you. That was a good explanation.
The other thing to point out on this subdivision is that they've got 2 different phases that they're working on. And at the preliminary plat stage, we would look to see a phasing plan developed so that developers like doing a phased approach to some of these developments because the infrastructure costs are high. And if they do a phase one, then they can chunk off a piece of it first and start to get some of their money back out. And then they will have enough money to put in the additional phases going forward. One thing that to also note on this over here on the left side of the screen, this lot here is not a lot at all. It's a detention basin. It's one of the things that we start looking at in a preliminary plat type setting. And I'll get to more on that in just a second, but just to keep in mind, this detention basin has to go in. If they do a phased approach, they have to put in the detention basin with phase one. So all of the required detention and stormwater and utilities, they all have to be sized in phase one, such that when phase two comes in, that we're not scrambling to try to figure out how to handle everything that's in phase two. It's a lengthy, elaborate, and detailed process, and Dana is second to none when it comes to figuring these things out and keeping track of all of the little nuts and bolts that take place in this kind of development. Anything to add to that, Dana, Jill?
I would just say on the phasing plan, we also look at accesses. So like on this particular one, they were, the phase line was actually further towards 89 initially, but the number of lots, because it only has that one interconnection on 3100, it was too many lots for fire code. So they had to move the phase line north or northeast in order to get additional accesses into that first phase.
Yeah, they originally wanted to put the phasing line right here and just stub this road right here. We required them to shift that over so that they would have that additional emergency ingress and egress here and here. So they accommodated us for that. I just threw this up here. This is with that Maycog Moore preliminary plat. These are just the number of documents that you can see that were required at preliminary plat phases. There was a lot of correspondence back and forth. A lot of emails, a lot of iterations, and we looked through all of these documents meticulously, looking for adherence to the code, best management practices, city standards and requirements. We require will serve letters from utilities at this point of the game. If the concept plan is a 30,000 foot view, the preliminary plat is really the micro view of things. And we really drill down and dig down deep. Now, this is a lot of times, and this is to your point, Steve, a lot of times where the process gets bogged down. And what we've noticed, and I've noticed this with all of the engineers that I've worked with across all of the jurisdictions that I've served at, the process gets bogged down at this point because the developer's engineer will hire or will produce something, and they will send that over to staff. Well, staff will respond to that within a couple of weeks, and we'll get back a set of revisions and requirements that were not addressed by the initial submittal. Then it proceeds to be a kind of iterative process and discussion between the city and the developer and the developer's engineer. And that can take several months because, again, as we go through these things, new things come to light and changes are made that affect other things. And you pull on one part of the sweater here and it affects the sweater over here. And it's an exacting and deliberative process. But where the time really comes in is that the city has a responsibility to get comments back to the developer within a specified time frame. But the developer is under no such constraints. So the developer the city will get comments back to the developer, and the developer's engineer will take their time in responding to those. And that's generally where it languishes. Then the developer will say, okay, here's my engineer's next iteration. and expect to be put immediately on the next available city council meeting. Well, we haven't had a chance as staff to review and make sure that what we'd asked for to be addressed was addressed. And in many times it hasn't, or maybe they've done items 1 through 10 from the city's review, and they've looked at them, but they've only responded to items 1 through 8, and still 9 and 10 that the city asked for hasn't been addressed. And you know, we're all human, we're all just working on this, but if we ask for something, then we need to have it addressed, right? So all of that to say, there's a lot that goes on in this process, and this is handled between staff and the developer, and it goes back and forth for several months. The quickest that I've ever seen it go through, and I've seen maybe 2 perfect submittals in my career, which is weird to me because these engineers, the developers engineers work with the city and they know our standards. So I don't know why they don't just copy and paste everything over to their stuff and turn it in. And then it would be like, okay, well, great. They always want, for some reason, they always want to argue about something. And that's what takes time. And so.
Questions.
Yeah.
Our staff has to turn around so fast. Like, what is that time frame? How long do we have? And is that by state law, or we just have our own standard, or what is that?
We have our own standard, and our goal is 2 weeks, but we ask to allow up to 4 weeks. Jill, you can respond to this, but I don't think it's ever taken us longer than 2 weeks to get back, right?
Dana and everybody have been awesome, and I think the average is actually 7 to 10 days, not even 2 full weeks.
Yeah.
I'm pretty slow.
Some of the projects, again, like Bill was saying, the bigger projects do take longer to really dive in and look at. So some of the bigger projects do take us a little bit more time, but the little ones, we spit them out as fast as we can out of respect for the applicant, so they're not waiting on us.
Well, and I guess to me, a lot of times people, this is their single project, and it usually involves the smaller ones, you know, that aren't doing, you know, they're not a big company and they're not doing subdivisions all across the state, but to them, that's the only thing going, and it's unfortunately not our only thing going. So I mean, there's four going currently, 4 bigger ones.
Yes, those are the
But
ones that
then-
are being reviewed, yeah.
And each one of them
Constantly
think
inspected.
that, yes, and each one of them think that, or it's their only project, but to us, you know, yeah, we have the 4 to review in all the legalities of the code, the state, the utilities rules and laws, and sometimes those things do take a lot longer and they feel like you're ignoring them, but it's not your only job, and a lot of us are doing 4 different types of jobs. You're not at a city, we're definitely in growing pains where you don't have a single reviewer and you don't have a single inspector. You know, there's the utilities group is supposed to be maintenance and inspectors, and some of those timelines don't always work out. And unfortunately, you know, Pleasant View had always been on the more rural side, but I personally believe you're at a growing stage where that isn't going to work much longer, because those things are becoming harder and harder as more laws and regulations are dropped on you. And we're all still trying to do 5 different positions, jobs. So our timelines, sometimes can be longer than maybe they should if you had, since we're constantly compared to North Ogden. Well, North Ogden's 4 times bigger than us, and they have individuals that all they do is administration and reviews. They have a in-house public works inspector where we utilize Jones and our staff to cover different parts of the process. So you don't have a specialized individual doing entire processes, if that makes sense. And maybe that's my personal opinion, but that's what I've noticed. And if you're talking where we're constantly referencing other cities have a far different type of staffing than Pleasant View currently has.
So the long and short of that is that we are doing the best that we can with the resources that are available.
And all things considered, you guys do a phenomenal job and do it almost just as fast as everybody else, if not faster, across the state.
Thank you.
It's true.
We are trying our best. I just wanted to point out, I'm sorry, Ann, I'm cutting you off. I apologize. I just wanted to point out our first review to this subdivision, which again is about, I don't remember how many lots, I think 60 lots, and over, I think more than 20 something acres. Our first review was sent over to them on September 27th of 2018. And the city council reviewed and approved the preliminary plat on April 9th of 2019. And so that was, it was a little bit longer than normal, but still, within a 6 or 7 month time frame that they got through all of this stuff with staff and all of the things. And I'll go over an example of what the construction documents look like, not in great detail, but just to give you an idea of what the kinds of things we're looking at when they come in. I'm sorry, Ann, go ahead.
I just have a quick question. So you're saying that sometimes the engineer gets with the city, then the city gets back to the engineer, but the engineer sometimes doesn't get back to the developer for some time. Like, do we ever just like CC the developer in so that they see that we've responded already?
Oh, always.
Okay, all right. That's good. And then also one other quick question, is there a time frame from when they start to when there's a required completion without refiling?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Isn't it like a year? Or
they are allowed to have an approval last for a year with a possible year extension, but that's once you've approved. The application itself, and this gets into a little bit of a sticky question because it involves legal vesting and other kinds of rights. I don't think, now Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have an application termination time. Is that?
No, well, the application itself, I'll have to read the code book, but I don't think there is a time frame on the actual application. However, once the approval goes through, for example, preliminary, according to the code in the book, it does say they have 1 year to apply for final, or else they have to start over.
So in this case, on this Maycock Moore, now it's a little bit different when it's a phased subdivision because we understand that things are going to just take a little bit longer. But in this case, they got approval in April of 2019, and they are in construction phase right now. Now, as long as the subdivision is in active development and construction, I tend to try to be as lenient as I can with the time frame and with the approvals and things like that, just because I know that sometimes unforeseen circumstances pop up, and construction market being what it is, things just take longer than anticipated. And so I try to be as lenient as I can and let people work through the process just as expeditiously as they can on their end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, when you say approval, are you talking approval of the committee, the development committee, or approval of the Commission City Council?
The preliminary plat, which is approved by the city council.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to preliminary plat requirements. Now, again, these are not specific details as what the requirements are. We do offer a checklist of things, but the checklist also refers back to the code, and everything that we require is in the code. And if it's not in the code, we can't require it. Does that make sense? Okay, I just want to be very clear on that point. We require what's in the code, but we can't require more than what is in the code.
But you have to require at least what state requires, and all of it. You
Yes.
can't supersede that at all, and this is pretty standard.
Yeah. So just have a look at those. I'm not going to go over it, but the point is that there's a pretty exhaustive list of things that are required. And going through and over and under and all of these things that we have to do to review these documents, it takes a while, and it's a process. It's a lengthy process. So do you have any questions about anything on that? I wanted to point out item number 6, and this is the question of the last couple of weeks. An escrow agreement is required, and it's required before it goes to preliminary or to final plat for approval. And there's another, in my next slide, I go over what's required for final plat. But the escrow agreement, the preliminary numbers are evaluated by the city engineer at this stage of the game because the developer is putting pipes and roads and sidewalks and things in the ground that will eventually be owned by the city. And we want to make protection is for the city, it's for the developer, it's for the eventual homeowners, and it's for every person who pays taxes in Pleasant View to make sure that they are getting what they are required to get and what their taxes are going to be paying for in perpetuity. So if the developer comes in and puts in junk, and we've seen it, then we have them tear it back out and redo it. So I can't emphasize that point enough. This is the city's protection to make sure that our infrastructure that's put in that we will eventually own is done to the best and highest standards as required by the code.
This escrow agreement has to be entered in before they even go to what, planning commission or city council?
Before final plat.
Okay.
So that's next.
So the numbers are just reviewed, but they don't have to post it. They can get preliminary approval from planning commission and city council. They don't have to post the agreement doesn't have to be approved or post bond until after both approvals. They can start, but it's just before final, right?
Final plat approval, right. So let me go to the next thing. In final plat, it's also very simple because a lot of the questions and concerns have largely been resolved in the preliminary plat process. Then two things can happen. The developer can submit to the city construction documents and get those approved, and then start construction on the development after having received preliminary plat approval. Okay, the developer puts those in the ground, and then before final plat application or in conjunction with final plat application, the developer has to either bond for all of the outstanding improvements that are required, or they have to put everything that's required in the ground, and they're only required to post a 10% warranty bond. Okay, and the warranty bond is provided to the city such that if there's anything that comes up with deficient workmanship or incomplete, whatever, shucks, in Morgan County, the developer forgot to pull a piece of plywood out of a storm drain. And you can ask Tyson, but that's the stuff of nightmare right there, because it floods everybody, and there's no way to figure out where it is. And then once you're in it, how do you get this piece of plywood out? So that money is intended to go and pay for those kinds of fixes later on. Now, typically the developer will go in the warranty period, fix those himself, and then get the full amount of the bond back when the 1-year warranty period is up. But if the developer opts to bond for the whole amount, they're on the hook for 100% of the improvements plus the 10% warranty bond at the time of final plat approval. That's it. If they want to do the full subdivision, then they're on the full improvements in the ground, then they're only on the hook for the 10% warranty bond. My preference always is, and I'll tell you why in a second, but my preference always is for the developer to put the infrastructure in the ground, do the 10% warranty bond, get final plat approval, and then record and start selling lots. Okay, that's my preference. It's the best way. Most developers follow that route. Most do, because it's the least amount of headache for them. They don't have to bond for the thing and then pay to put it in the ground. And it just has the fewest question marks going forward. But I like it because what happens is if you post the bond and record, then you can start selling lots. And we have people who want to get building permits that we can't give them because the developer hasn't finished all of the improvements that are required. So it can and does happen, but boy, it puts the city in a very tough position. And the staff people come into staff saying, hey, I want a final plat, or I want a building permit, and we have to say, I'm sorry, go talk to the developer. We can't give you a building permit because of something that he's doing or not doing.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Bill, so what you just explained, if they do all those improvements and take care of that, their process is really faster. And I guess if they go the other route and try to post the improvement bond ahead of time, that requires a lot more money up front for them. But they have to do it either way, you know,
Either
to
way, it
protect the
has to be
city.
done.
But
the difference is when you can start selling lots.
right, it has to record first, always has to record.
Right, so the state code allows for developers to post a bond for all required improvements. So if there's anything that's outstanding, if they get to a point where they're like, you know what, we need to start selling lots because we need to start a revenue stream in here, and we don't have enough money to put asphalt in, and besides it's late October, early November, and no one's doing asphalt right now. We need to start selling these lots now to carry us through the winter and then provide money for the asphalt in the spring. They can post a bond for it, put the asphalt in the spring. Great, that works great. That's not typically what happens. Typically what happens is developers will, when they do decide to bond, they will bond for the whole improvements and then just, they drag their feet. And the city doesn't have any more leverage on getting the developer to get the stuff in the ground other than the fact that we're holding on to their bond. And it just becomes a big logistical mess and nightmare. And we've got, instead of dealing with one developer on these questions, we're dealing with maybe 20 or 30 individual property and homeowners, and they just want to build their house of their dreams on their cute little lot in Pleasant View that they have paid a lot of money for. And the city is always the bad guy in these situations. The city is always the bad guy. And so I don't love it.
Statute, right? That's state statute. They have to post the bond or do the improvements, one or the other, and have the warranty, you know, posted as well before it records. That's the state requirement. That's not even ours on top of it.
Yeah, that's not, you're absolutely right.
You have to allow both methods?
We do have to allow, because state code allows.
Okay.
Tyson, Jill, Dana, anything on that?
Nope.
Does preliminary plat, sorry, Dana, I'm not Dana or Tyson, sorry.
Man.
Go ahead.
Does preliminary plat have to go planning commission, city council, and final plat, planning commission, city council, both of them?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear. That's a good question. Preliminary plat does go to planning commission and the city council, and the final plat only goes to the city council, does not go back to planning commission.
Dana, Tyson, anything else? Sorry.
You're awesome, man. Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, let me get through these last little.
I do have one more question. Can I ask?
Go ahead.
The state requires also the land use a recommendation from planning commission for the preliminary plat. You can't never skip planning commission for that, for the preliminary plat. And since city council is the land use authority, that's why we have to approve final plat, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So the hiccup from like a couple weeks ago, it was in this final plat stage, yes?
Which one? I'm sorry.
It's from 2 weeks ago.
Terrace Hills.
She's talking
yes,
about
this
this
was.
one that you have up.
Yes, that's right. And so that's why I'm bringing this back up now, because I just wanted to show you, this is what a final plat looks like. It looks very similar to the preliminary plat. Sometimes on the preliminary plat, they will leave off the owner's dedication that you see over here on the right. The surveyor's certificate. We do want to see the boundary description, and sometimes the plat notes will change between the preliminary and final. And then of course, the most important thing is these signature blocks here that you see on the left, where the city is signing off. And this is the final bite of the apple for the city to make sure that everything on the plat was done correctly. We've had, and it almost happens with every plat, where something will get left off of the discussion, and we required something, and they've left it out of the final plat. And with this one, for example, there was a note that was required governing these lots up in this area that had to do with low water pressure up here. And it wasn't like a danger kind of a thing, but it was just more of a courtesy heads up to the property owners that will eventually buy there to say, hey, look, this area may potentially have some low water pressure, and until the road is punched through up to the north and we can loop it in. But if you buy it, you're buying it with full awareness that there could be some water pressure. It's still fine. It's still within the limits and requirements and things, but it's definitely lower than what we would expect at other places. So that note got left off of the plat. And so Dana noticed that, and she's like, well, I'm not going to sign that because we need that in there. That's the protection for the property owners down the road. And so,
Will you help me
so
understand?
can they write that in?
yeah, they could write it in. It doesn't have to be typed in or all formal or anything, but before we sign it and send it over to the recorder's office, and so they can start selling lots, we want to make sure that that note is noted.
Believe it or not, most of the Mylars that I take to the county have some type of correction that's handwritten in. It just has to be done by a Sharpie.
Yeah, it's just indelible ink.
On the final escrow agreement, what timeline does the developer have to have that in before they can be seen by city council for us to approve and then record?
Well, our preference would be that they bring the final escrow in with the final plat. We understand that that's not always possible, but if at all possible, we like to bring it in and run it at the same time at the same meeting, so you don't have to have the same thing twice. We've seen this.
Isn't that required in our code that they post
It
that
is.
escrow agreement before final approval at city council?
It
Yes.
is.
How much before?
It's
Well-
not considered a complete application without it.
Yeah. So how much before is a good question. Just far enough in advance so that we can get it on the same agenda with the final plat, I guess is all I would say.
The other cities that I've looked at, the shortest amount of time was 10 business days before the next city council meeting, at least the other cities that I looked at. That was the shortest time. Some even went up to 20 days.
And we've tried to be as flexible as we can with everybody, but it's a little bit of a moving target for some.
Well, and sometimes I think the flexibility gets us in trouble. Like if we just have a standard, this is when it's due, or you're not on the, whatever it is, like, let's just have it and stick with it.
Well, it's hard because then you get the developers that will say, well, the city is so hard to work with and your deadlines are arbitrary and it doesn't mean anything. And they call the mayor or, a couple of council members and you guys are like, oh, come on, let him on. It's fine.
But if it's in the code and you say no exceptions, like lots of codes that I've read in the last 2 weeks, then that's that. All checklist items have to be done and there are no exceptions.
Well, that's certainly one way to approach it. The other way to approach it is, the city exists, the city council exists to address these things, not just have it all written down in code and say, if it was all that black and white, they wouldn't even need us. So, so you got to decide how do you want to approach this? Are we here to help people, or are we here to just, this is the law and it's the heck with you? Well,
I understand.
I had it 9 days in advance and they actually had it reviewed within, the next 2 days. They told me they had it reviewed. And so because they didn't get it in 10 days though, I can't have it till the whole next next.
No, I agree
so-
with what you're saying. I understand, but I think that we set the expectation, and if there's a
Well, that's
mitigating
what's happening.
circumstances.
That's exactly what's that. There is an expectation, and if they don't meet the expectation, if we look at it on a case-by-case basis, it's not like we're flooded with these. We haven't had 100 of them this last 3.5 years, but we've had one, and council voted to let it go. Now, at the end of that, put the onus right back on him and said, it's now on you. Hopefully those people that are waiting to buy lots are on YouTube watching this meeting. Where are we at on that escrow agreement that we granted 2 weeks ago?
To be honest, we're having issues.
Has it been posted?
No,
Okay, yeah.
I have the agreement, but the bank's having issues.
So
Why we haven't.
in a way, it was good. I mean, we put the onus on the staff. The onus is always on the staff. They only bring us good escrow agreements. But there was a sense of urgency expressed so that the people could buy, and we worked with them. We did our job. We tried to help the citizens that were on, watching, and the developer let them down, which is usually the case. It's usually not the city that's letting these people down, but we're the ones getting blamed for it. They go back and say, the engineer goes back to the developer goes back to the potential purchaser and says, the city rejected XYZ, and so we're just waiting for the city. You know darn well that this is going to somehow be our fault that this was not the right escrow to the people wanting to buy the properties. They're not going to go back and say, hey, I really screwed up and I gave the wrong thing, or I didn't have the right thing, or the bank screwed up, whatever. It's going to be the city rejected it. So
I guess in that kind of situation, though, I think it would be, I can see why that would be the important part to say, look, we're not going to even bring it before city council until all these conditions are met. That way we don't run into this type of situation.
we still run into the situation.
Well, but we just mitigate it just a little bit better. That's all.
That's what we're trying to do, is mitigate it and work with these people that might bring it in 7. Where do you draw the line? 10 days, 7 days, 5 days?
At least have it in your code like other cities do. That's what I would like.
Well, that takes the flexibility right out of it.
But at least in the cities that almost every single one.
Not every other city. Let's worry about Pleasantville, what we can do.
I would like it in the
our
code.
citizens. We're supposedly the hardest city in the world to work with, and it's absolutely not the truth. But we're not here to make it harder for us to work with. We're trying to simplify and make the process easier for us to work with.
What we have done in the past is we have some state code noticing requirements that are pretty hard and fast. And if you're not in by a certain time, then you can't get to the planning commission, for example, because we got to do public notice for the meetings. And the other items that don't require a public hearing or a public meeting, we've allowed people to bring stuff in all the way up to the Thursday before the Tuesday meeting at City Council. And so that tends to be what works well and best for us. But even the Thursday before the City Council meeting doesn't leave us as staff a whole lot of time to review things and make sure that they're done correctly. And so.
And I agree, Bill, but my point is, if we get it done, great, we can put it on. And they didn't meet the 10 days, but we got it done for them. Maybe it was a slow week and we was able to pull it off. But just because, then it can be put on the city. But if it's in code that says we can't, then we're not going to. And we could, we wasted them 2 weeks just because it was an arbitrary figure that we threw in the code. I have to excuse myself for about 10 to 15 minutes. I'll turn the meeting over to Mayor Pro Tem Bailey.
Well, good. Now that the mayor's gone, we can talk about him.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what kind of rule of thumb that I'm doing for noticing purposes to kind of get people in as quickly as I can is whenever they turn it in, they turn it in. What I'm telling them is it has to be reviewed and approved to be on the agenda by a certain day. So instead of saying you can only turn it in, if you turn it in by this day, great, you know, then I can put you on, but that doesn't give us much time depending on the size of the project. So what I would suggest is putting in the code saying, if your project is turned in and approved by staff to be on the agenda by such and such day, so many days before the meeting, then it can be on the agenda. But that's my opinion. That way there's a little bit more flexibility versus them just turning things in.
I like that
Yeah,
idea.
but now you get back into staff not having a timeline, and then staff's just going to be called out as we failed to meet their deadline because you don't have a
You're right.
staff.
It's a double-edged sword.
I think
Yeah,
if
because you would need a staff that had either individuals that's all they're doing, or you need a staff code timeline that you're adhering to as well, and that they know if you submit at this time, staff is always given X dates, but you don't want to do that because we don't individually do that. So if you have a terrible project, some require more time than others, and or via emergencies, or you lose all your staff timeline variance by doing what you're talking about, and you don't have the staff to accomplish that goal.
I think if you set the expectation, and I understand what Mayor Call is saying, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I think that sometimes you, again, nothing's foolproof, but if the expectation is set of what and when is required, you get away from people thinking that they can just do it, or there's favoritism, or there's, you know, staff situations or whatever else, and set the expectation.
Oh, I love rules.
Yes.
And I love deadlines when
set the
you have a manageable amount of people.
Yeah.
Just a quick comment here. The frustration I'm hearing from developers when they're calling me, which has just been a couple of times, but they're just telling me they're getting one answer from someone else and a different answer from someone else. So it's just, I think if we can just go to consistency, I think that works. So
if it's the same across the board, instead of, oh, this person got this in, you know, and we understand that there's situations, but set your expectation, be clear, and so that no matter who they go to, that's the answer.
And I want to agree with everything that's been said, but I also want to point out that these last 2 weeks are often the most groused about 2 weeks in a developer's life, because getting on an agenda is always their target. They feel like that's a milestone to get that approval and get on an agenda in front of the council or the planning commission or whatever. And what we've seen, and Jill, you can back me up, Dana, on this, what we've seen is that that's not where the lion's share of the time is eaten up. It's not in the 2 week waiting period getting to the approval. It's all of the stuff, the months and months of stuff that happens before that. That's where all the time gets eaten up. And now all of a sudden it's a 911 emergency, and we've got to get on that next agenda next week, and how dare you hold me up, kind of a thing, you know? So
I think it's between getting information back from the submittals after we've sent comments. Another thing would be making sure that the developer, or whoever's that the applicant, will put it that way, is actually giving us absolutely everything that is required, rather than piece by piece by piece, but missing, you know, the plat, or missing a certain will serve, but then calling and demanding to be on the agenda. That's, I'm going to be honest, that's my biggest frustration.
That's frustrating. And yeah.
And the expectation is typed out for them, right, in your checklist?
Mm-hmm.
They know what needs to be there. Okay.
And I'm currently updating it so they have to initial it, so I can prove to them saying, you initialed this, you read it. I can't hold your hand the whole time.
You know, and we're not unsympathetic to the developers' needs and interests in this. They have a lot of money invested in the city, in the ground, in infrastructure, in roads and sidewalks, and time, especially time. They are invested heavily in these things. And it's not lost on me. These guys are so far mortgaged. I couldn't do it. I would be so nervous all the time. I don't think I could breathe. I couldn't go home and look my kids in the face. I'm in debt up to my eyeballs, and I don't start making money back until I sell the last 3 or 4 lots of a development. I just don't. And every delay, every second, every minute, every week, it all costs me money, and I get it. On the other hand, property is only becoming more valuable, right? Every minute that goes by, the value of that house goes up. We saw in the last 6 months that property values have gone up, 50%. And that's not a small thing. So I am sympathetic, and we are trying to get people through as quickly as we can, as efficiently as we can, with no unexpected delays and no weird hiccups or requirements. Our processes are pretty straightforward. And that's the whole point of this conversation, is to show that staff's processes are pretty straightforward. What we need and require from developers are known. They are not a mystery. They're on websites, and these, for the most part, these developers, engineers have worked with the city in various formats and circumstances through lots of different development. We know who these developers are. We know who their engineers are, and we have good relationships with all of them. We really do. And as we work through things together, we're building a city that's awesome, and we're proud of it. So,
yeah, let's be clear. I mean, for the most part, I mean, these are all businesses. And they know the rules. They know what makes money. They know. I mean, we don't need to cater to them in all these abnormal situations. They know how to do this. So,
yeah,
I agree, Dave. And our process is not any more different than any other city.
Every time they say we're the worst city to deal with, I mean,
they say that to everybody.
They're just saying that to get us to bend to their situation. And I mean, I don't agree with it most of the time. So.
Yeah, well, and we are actively, and I hope that if there's any developers that are watching this, I hope that they realize that the very fact that we're having this conversation, spending council time and staff time to address these issues, should indicate that we are interested in making sure that development happens as efficiently as possible. We have an interest in that. We want to, yeah, that's it. So let me just go over these last couple of slides really quick. This is what a set of construction documents looks like. This first one is just the roads layout. Here's a bunch of notes. Again, all of these notes are read meticulously by Dana. She catches every typo and every little weird thing. She really does. And I can't even read that, but that's all, it's all there. Anyway, then there's these road plans, which, I've been looking at these my whole career, and I'm just barely starting to make sense of them. This is why I rely on Dana and Tyson to provide technical and engineering type expertise. This is just one section of the road. This section of the road, every section that you saw on this previous page here, they all get their own page. And all of those little things that are called out, their manholes, their connections, their thrust blocks and pipes and street lights and street signs and everything. That's all in there. This is a grading and drainage plan. Again, Dana is second to none at this kind of review, and we can all rest well at night in our beds, seriously, because Dana has looked over our plans and we know that we're not going to be flooded out. And I say that with no small sense of humility and gratitude, because this is not a small thing. This is people's homes, their dreams, they're wrapped up in this thing. And if it's done wrong, you're going to get water in your basement. But Dana is awesome. And then lastly, this is a utility plan, again, showing you that all of these things, there's a million little details in this that just need to be addressed. Here's your stormwater pollution exhibit and other details and notes and things. We have to look through these things in every subdivision that comes through, every single one. Now, they're pretty much the same, but they're not the same. And so we have to look through and make sure that everyone is doing everything according to what our standards are. And you'd be amazed with what people try to get away with. Finally, I just want to touch on the adequate public facilities ordinance. This is required my preference would be at preliminary plat. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. You guys are familiar with this, but the determination for this, it gets made and approved. This is how you get to develop in the city. If there is enough capacity in our system, both roads and storm sewer and water and sanitary sewer, if there is enough capacity, you may develop. If there is not, you may not. You can put in infrastructure to make things so that you can develop according to what you want. But if you're hoping to tack onto our existing system, then you have to demonstrate that there is enough capacity in our system to handle your proposed development. So that's that adequate public facilities. Dana, Jill, Tyson, anything to add on adequate public facilities?
Just that. Oh,
go ahead, Tyson.
You go. Oh, I was just going to say that some people will reference that as a water problem that was fixed, and if that's when that came about, that isn't the only reason you have that, and it's so the city doesn't end up in a situation like that again. Not just a old remnant of a problem that was fixed. It's so you don't have that problem with any of your systems ever again. In case you hear that, because I've heard it referenced as a relic that has been fixed or isn't a problem anymore, so why do we do it? And it's to make sure those problems of that magnitude never happen again, i.e. a water moratorium on building. Just FYI.
I was gonna say basically the same thing. You know, a lot of people associate that with there was a shortage of water, but this also checks for fire flows and pressures and things like that. So if you're connecting on to the end of like the very east side of the system, there's some undersized lines there, and if you're planning a new development, you may not have adequate fire flow. So we go through the subdivision, through this adequate public facilities process to model the system to make sure that we can get fire flow there. And if not, then we can figure out how to, but it's not going to be an overnight type thing.
Okay. I did get a couple of comments, Mayor Pro Tem, if it's all right, if I read those comments into the record. These were on YouTube. Carson Jones says, what about the subdivisions that are already in a development agreement and beginning a new phase? It's a good point. Development agreements generally supersede most of the rest of the code, unless there are specific parameters written into a development agreement that say which parameters of the code do require review and updating as the development agreement goes through. Most development agreements also have a sunset clause in them. When it comes to development agreements, they generally trump the local ordinances. So that when we do enter a development agreement, we need to make sure that we either say all other ordinances apply or we say that this is very specific and detailed as to what we're entering into.
Who reviews those? Do you make sure that language is in there? Who writes them and who reviews them?
Yeah, so it's reviewed by staff, including Mike House, the city attorney, and then it's sent to the city council for ultimate review and approval.
Do you make sure that language is in there to adhere to our code explicitly?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
It's in our template.
Yeah. Carson then asks, can you touch on a cash versus loan / line of credit escrow as escrow and bond guarantee? That's actually a good point. Thank you, Carson, for bringing that up. if you're still listening, Carson. Cash bond is a bond that says that he has that much money in a bank account that is set aside specifically to cover any deficiencies or problems or insufficiencies that are in the infrastructure that he's put in the ground. So for example, if he's putting in $1 million worth of road and other infrastructure, then he puts $1 million cash bond in the bank. In Morgan County, that's all they allowed. That was all they allowed. And Jill, you can talk to Dana, you can talk to what we require here. But the other option is to do a credit escrow or a loan. And this is much less risky for the developer. It puts more of the burden on the financial institution. They're basically saying we're going to cover through a line of credit or a loan guarantee for the amount of the improvements. Again, it shifts the burden from the developer to have all of that money sitting in a cash escrow onto the financial institution, who then covers the note if the developer should fail.
So 2 questions. Do we accept both? And we verify that either the cash or the credit has been extended?
Correct. We do verify that. Jill, Dana, help me out. What do we require?
We don't want cash bonds, at least from brought to the city at least.
What does our code require?
An escrow, like
It
an
doesn't
escrow to be
specify.
set up, and that's all it says.
We don't have the form specified necessarily. We prefer, cash escrows are good for a lot of reasons, but they are also sticky because then the city holds on to $1 million potentially, or whatever the amount is. And then, you know, there becomes a question of, do we charge or pay interest out? We're getting interest on it. Do we pay interest out on it? You know, how do we handle things like that? It becomes a little bit of a logistical mess that way. But it is nicer in some ways in that if we ever did need to draw down on it, we don't have to go after a financial institution. And we've seen that financial institutions may go under and municipalities, communities are left holding the bag.
Heather actually has an example of that. I asked her about it. There was a bank that went under with the previous subdivision.
It was Centennial Bank, yeah.
Yep.
And that was a mess.
It becomes a mess because then someone buys their assets and you have to go after whoever bought the assets, and you know, it's a mess. So there's pros and cons either way. The last thing that Carson says is that bond and escrow is required before recording, not necessarily before final approval. That is done that way in many different cities, but we are not one of those cities. We are a city that requires the bond to be and escrow to be posted before final plat approval per our code. So
and a lot of cities do that the same way that we do it too.
Yeah, state code is ambiguous on this point, and so cities do it both different ways. I personally feel like it's a lot better as far as just general practice goes, that we have everything all ready to go so that when it gets to final plat approval time in front of the city council, all of the ducks are in a row. Everything has been addressed. There's no outstanding items. There's no reason to come back to the city council for escrow approval. Everything's just, it's all pretty simple and straightforward. It all has to be done at some point.
I would even add that it's nicer for those residents that are trying to buy those lots. So they're not attending finals and then sitting waiting. When are you going to record? When are you going to record? I'm waiting on the escrow, or I'm waiting on this just to go record. It's an easier and smoother process just to go through final. Everything's there. Boom, one meeting, and then next thing you know, you can go record after all the signatures.
While I was out, I contemplated a way to accomplish both Sarah's concern and my concern. And perhaps 10 days or whatever should be, if a guarantee. In other words, if you get your stuff to us in 10 days and it checks out, you will be on the agenda.
She was kind of saying how she does it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that. It sounds like.
No, I absolutely agree with that. If you
But
get,
that, we should not take away our flexibility to say, oh, you got it here in 9 days, 8 days, whatever, and it's still checked out. But we're not going to put you on the agenda till, 3.5 weeks out. But more, you get it to us and it's good, and we'll make sure you get it on. We'll have it on the next agenda.
yeah,
You don't get it to us. If you get it in 9 days, we can't guarantee it will be on the agenda, but we will certainly try to get it.
yeah. And if you set that language and kind of just that expectation, that's what I'm really trying to say. It's that way everybody reads it, everybody's treated that way. There's not that, oh, this person got it this way. But yes, so I think maybe just in the semantics, we were, maybe it sounded like we were disagreeing, but I think this setting the expectation of 10 days, before the next agenda, because you have to public notice the meeting, right? So I think, but yeah, so yeah.
I like that wording the mayor's suggesting. I think that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Genius, even.
Yep. Very good. But to what Jill was saying, though, also one of the things that when you don't have all those requirements met and you meet in city council, even though we all trust staff and staff is awesome, it's no longer a matter of public record. And so when people are observing this and residents are making sure that we're doing our due diligence to protect them and their interests with their tax dollars, they want to know that we have checked it off, that we have seen that they've met all the requirements. And so it was done in a public meeting. The public had a chance to show up. And now if we do something else, beyond that, now it's no longer a public meeting and they have to, just things like that. When it's public meeting, public record, they have a chance to appear, to express their concerns. That's why I think it's important to make sure all those things are met before the meeting. And then we can show that, yep, we've done it and we have staff's back, they've got our back. So.
In all of these things, again, I'm hoping that you're seeing that the staff has a definite energy and interest in making sure that things go through as efficiently as possible, and that we work within constraints that are set on us by our own local code as well as state code. And our own local code is largely informed by state code as well. And so we really do the best that we can, given the requirements that we live under. So I hope that makes sense. And this is just one chapter of a much larger process review that we're undergoing at the city, at the mayor's request and at the council's request. We're looking at all of our processes throughout the city to make sure that they're streamlined and efficient. And I've asked all of the department heads to put together a report on what they're doing, and if there are avenues of improvement, let's look at those and put the things in place so that we can help our residents in a more efficient and positive way. So our staff is fantastic. We really are second to none. I would put our staff up against any staff in any city, in any state. We have a fantastic team, and they work well and hard, and we love each other. And it's a rare thing to be a part of an organization like this, and I'm grateful for it and humbled each day I come to work. So look for more of that, though. Look for more of what we can do to do better and to help people better and to be more efficient. And if you hear things, if you're out and about and people bend your ear, please let us know. We're happy to make improvements. We want to do better. And if we can, we welcome that. So I'm grateful for Carson for listening in. If you're still there, thank you. And for, he met with the mayor and I, and we've met with other developers. We want to know how we can do better in all of these processes. So we're grateful for everybody's patience as we work through these things.
And I'm hopeful, and I'm sure we'll get the escrow agreement worked out. I don't know. I have no ability to see who's on YouTube or not. If there are any of those people that are waiting for you know, to get that plat recorded so they can buy. You know, I can guarantee you the city will do all they can to work with Carson and the bank and to make this happen as soon as we can together. I mean, the approvals are all there. We just need to make sure that the escrow is solid. So hopefully within days, we can get this solved and you guys can buy your lots and start building.
Yep.
That's our goal, is to help. All right. The next item on the agenda is a closed meeting to discuss deployment of security personnel, devices, or systems. And so we need to motion to go into a closed meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to go into a closed meeting.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, motion by Bailey, second by Marriott. Roll call vote. Bailey?
Yes.
Harrington?
Yes.
Marriott?
Yes.
Gibson?
Yes.
Gary?
Yes.
Okay. All righty. Yeah, we gotta stop that. We gotta excuse Mark. Mark, you still there? And we're gonna shut down YouTube and thank you. Well, he doesn't hear me now.